All of these things can follow as a result of what is predicted here. Plan ahead. These things can happen gradually, but they're worthwhile considering about what you will do. And remember that among the key characteristics for all of humanity is that we take care of each other in the process of doing this. What about our friends and our neighbors, and how can we help them to get through this period of time? There is another. At some point, you have to begin to think, well, should I take this seriously or not? Some people have asked me, do I personally believe that many of these things are going to happen? Well, I don't think it's terribly important whether I think so or not. But it can be really important is whether you think so or not. And so in that respect, let me just remind you who it is that's talking about this. Who is it that's talking about solar flares, for example? Well, actually, a lot of people. If it were one person, you say, I can ignore that. Well, what if I know that I mentioned Ed Dames and a whole raft of his people, or people who believe as he does, many of whom are senior to him in the intelligence community, have been talking about this for years. What about Stalking Wolf, who I talked about in part 5? What about the story of the chastisement in Garabandal, Spain, the apparition of the Virgin Mary? What are we going to just ignore all of those things and say, no, that can't be? I don't believe any of that. Well, and if I could thought about it a little bit longer and come up with an even longer list. What about? I hate to do this. What about the possibility of World War III? There are Nostradamus. Now, everybody takes that with a grain of salt, but the fact of it is, there is a new writer on this, Dolores Cannon, and Dolores has done a great service to humanity by making it possible to learn what he has been saying. There are the Enoch prophecies, and I will be going into that eventually in the next sections to come. What about a fellow by the name of Billy Myers, who says that he has had direct experience with ETs, for example? What about the issue of shift of consciousness? That is something which is to elevate all of mankind. Are we just to ignore that? The writers there are Drunvalo Melchizedek, George Civilis, Dolores Cannon, and a whole lot of other people, Mr. Wilcox, who need to be paid attention to. Would you think it was more important? What if you had another half a dozen names? What if you had read all of them yourself? Would you still continue to ignore it and say, no, I don't think it can happen? No, I think eventually you begin to say, I wonder if I should. What about pole shifting? I mentioned that. Pole shifting has been talked about by whom? Edgar Cayce, Melchizedek, Douglas James Cottrell, and many others. What about the Antichrist and the book of Revelations? Do you say, well, I'll ignore that too? There's a prediction that's been there for 2,000 years. there's a prediction that a lot of people have talked about and they continue to talk about and is important to their faith. Will you ever begin to take it seriously? Well, I hope so. And who has been talking about that besides the many books of the Bible? Well, again, the same Nostradamus, or good, someone who I really am very fond of, and that is Rudolf Steiner, who has talked about, who has linked the Antichrist with the second coming. Well, eventually, these things have to have some effect on you. Eventually, you have to say, don't you, maybe something's happening. Maybe things don't feel right in the world. And because things that are going on in climate and the volcanoes and eruptions and those things eventually are making me feel that something is occurring and that I should perhaps begin to consider the possibility that it's something important. Let me give you some additional information. Also from the same Douglas James Cottrell. He says, as you would look to Vesuvius and Etna, you would see that this would be the beginning of these aspects that we have already touched upon. There will be disturbances in the ocean. There will be spewing of ash from volcanoes. There will be a shudder and collapse of the west coast of North America. All of the continent will feel as if it is shuddering or shaking. You will see that the waters rise in the North Sea and then in the Mediterranean. You'll see the Pacific Ocean rise and all the continents of landmass along the edges will be flooded. In the coming year, expect to see more hurricanes and more cyclones. Look to the temperature of the oceans increasing degree by degree, and when you see a change of 1 degree, you will find more shaking and quaking on the 5 continents, and you would see the ice caps melting. The last will be the evaporation of the ice and the planet during a rotation processing. All right. We are looking at various points in time, but look at the eruptions of the volcanoes. They will speed up first in a very quick way and then almost in a simultaneous way at the end. And the end is not the end of the earth. It may or may not be the end of your particular life or anybody else's. In fact, maybe these things are not meant to be a catastrophe that you escape from, but merely a warning that you can take advantage of. Thank you for your time, your interest, and your love of God and man. Goodbye.